Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily McDonald, and you will have to mind my voice because I am a little sick today, but I had to come on and talk to you all about Belize. And I'm talking to you about Belize today because I just got back from a 2.5-week trip there where I was doing research on women's health and spirituality. And I really think that I could probably just make a whole spin-off podcast on Belize. It is such an amazing country. There's so much There's so much content really to be made about this. And I'm going to try to cap it into one episode. You might hear a little bit more about Belize in some future episodes. And if you listen to the last episode, I talked to you about Mennonite culture. But here's how I'm thinking it's going to work. I'm going to tell you first about where to go in Belize. If you want to go on a vacation, I want to talk to you about all the amazing parts of Belize, what to do there, so on and so forth. And then I'd really like to share about some of the research that I was doing. But first, like we always do, we're going to start with the basics. So Belize is a small country in Central America. It's squeezed right between Mexico and Guatemala, and it's a really, really small country. So it's about the size of Massachusetts, and it only has 400,000 people in total. It's home to this massive reef, and it has some of the best views to go along with it. And so it's really popular for snorkeling and for scuba diving and just going to the beach in general. Another thing about Belize is it's kind of this melting pot of all of these different cultures, and interestingly, Belize is actually the only country in Central America that speaks English, and that's because, all other countries in Central America were colonized by Spain. Belize was colonized by Britain, and it didn't gain its independence from England until 1981. And so over time, many different cultural groups have made Belize their home, and some of these groups are the Mayans, who are native to Belize, the Mestizo, which is the largest group in Belize, Garifuna, Creole, and Mennonites, which we talked about in the last episode, as I mentioned. And there are honestly so many more cultural groups that exist in Belize, and I think that that's one of the most unique parts about this country is when you go there, you really are experiencing a cross-cultural exchange, and you're experiencing and kind of witnessing a lot of different cultures, which makes for an amazing place to travel to, and there's definitely lots to do because of all the different cultures that exist. And Belize is just so gorgeous. I mean, you have oceans, you have mountains, there's farmlands, there's rainforest. There really is so much to choose from, and it's a really easy place to find resorts and to find vacation space. And it's also a place to, find research that you need. It's a great place to go backpacking through. It's a great place to camp out of. You really do have a lot of options. And so before we get into anything else, like I said, I want to talk to you all about where to go if you want to go vacation. If you want to have that luxury experience, Belize definitely has options for you. And so I'm just going to start by giving you some names of places to go. If you want to relax on the ocean, if you want to be waited on, if you are just looking to get out of the U.S., to get out of the cold, then I would suggest staying in the Burgess Cay. and it's the largest island in Belize, and it's one of the most popular places to go on the island, to go in the country, because the island is laid back, it's relaxed, you can go in the water every day, and you do have a lot of different options for how to stay. So if you wanted to stay in a luxury resort, like I said, there are places like that. If you wanted to stay in a hostel or a small hotel, or an inn, that is also an option for you. It has a pretty big downtown area, and so you can relax by the beach in the day, go into town by night, which is perfectly entertainable if you are in Belize because of everything that is going on. And so that would be the place that I would suggest if you are just looking to relax. Another option that you could go to is a lot of the island beach towns just kind of on the edge of Belize, and in most places around Belize, if you're staying in an island town, a lot of places really do have a nicer hotel or hostel or something like that to stay in, and that, island culture is very relaxed. It's very calming and a great place to vacation to. So if you're looking for that type of experience, I'm going to say either go to one of Belize's islands, like the one that I mentioned, or stay right on the edge of the country where the coast is. Another option that you could go to if you wanted to vacation or visit or travel to is the Cayo district. And that's actually where I stayed for about a week while I was in Belize, and the Cayo district is inland, so it's closer to the border of Guatemala, and it's close to where the mountains are, and the Cayo district is home to a lot of Mayan ruins, and this was something I didn't know much about before I went, but the Mayan culture, although it still really exists now, is such a historical and important part of Belize, and essentially 2,000 years ago more, when, the Mayans were kind of at their peak in a society, they built these amazing structures that you wouldn't even believe could exist that long ago, and they had so much, impact on the earth before, we even think that cultures would be advanced enough to do so, and there is so many remnants of that, and it's so beautiful. So you have a lot of monuments that you can go to. If you go inside of a lot of caves in Belize, there are remnants of sacrifices, and if you walk through the jungle, you can see parts of this old ancient Mayan culture that used to exist, and that now really does still exist today. And so if you're looking for more adventure, if you're looking for more culture, if you are looking to really immerse yourself into Belize, I would say that staying in the Cayo district is something that you would want to do. They have some amazing hostels. I stayed in a town called San Ignacio, and that was a great mix between a luxury spot. I felt comfortable. I felt safe. I felt like there were Western restaurants, there were local restaurants, but I really was, grabbing at that culture. I was getting a piece of that culture. I was meeting people who actually lived in Belize, not just people who worked, at the resort or so on and so forth. And so that is my breakdown of if you are looking for a vacation, I would say to either go, right to the ocean for a relaxing time, or I would say go into the Cayo district and find yourself some adventure, because there is so much adventure to be had in Belize. So when we come back from our break, I am going to tell you about some specific activities to do in order to plan your trip to Belize. Stay tuned.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
from our break just in time to talk about some activities that you should do while you're in Belize. Now, I will say a lot of these are revolved around the ocean, and the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, Belize is a small country, and so much of the attraction, and I think so much of its beauty, does really lie at the ocean, or at least in some beautiful waters that they have. And so my first thing that I think that you should do while you're in Belize is visit the Great Blue Hole. If you have never heard of the Great Blue Hole, you probably have seen pictures of it. It is a very famous spot in Belize. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So it's a giant marine sinkhole, and it's off the coast of Belize, and it lies basically near the center of Lighthouse Reef, which is this really large reef. And as I said, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. It is a massive hole about 1,000 feet across, and it formed for whatever reason, and it has this absolutely beautiful color. You can go swimming, you can go scuba diving, so on and so forth, and that is one of those attractions that you really should be going to if you are visiting Belize. My next activity that I think that you should go to is, as I mentioned before the break, go explore the Mayan caves. As I said before, it's in the Cayo district. You can go rafting, you can go tubing, you can go kayaking, you can go on foot, you can go swimming. Any of these options you can do with the tour guide going into these ancient Mayan caves. And something really interesting is there are stalagmites all throughout these caves, which I don't know much about. I don't know much about rock science, but they're these it's like water drippings essentially that form into this kind of rock, and it grows extremely slowly, and so the rock formations that you see are ancient, are as old as it gets, and they form these really beautiful almost, they look like light fixtures to me or something like that, and they're all reflective and sparkly and so gorgeous. And just being in the caves and being where you kind of know sacrifices happened is fascinating and a little spooky. And you can, like I said, you could go swimming inside the caves. When I went with a group of people, and we hiked through the jungle holding a tube. And then we got to this river, and we sat down in the tubes all together and floated down with the rapids, and we got out and explored and adventured, and we saw old pots and pans from Mayan sacrifices. We were able to swim around. We were able to jump off some of the bigger cliffs. And it was just an overall fascinating experience, and something that I think would be a shame if you missed while you were in Belize. The next activity I'm going to say is you have to go snorkeling. Go snorkeling, or if you're scuba certified or you want to be, go scuba diving, because the reef exists, and as we know, reefs are in great danger, and they are dwindling, and they are dying. And so if you are going to Belize soon, I really would suggest getting in the water and going snorkeling or scuba diving. Because this is a popular activity to do in Belize, there should be plenty of, guided snorkeling excursions, guided scuba diving excursions, but you can also probably pick up some snorkeling gear or rent some from your hotel, and just kind of getting out there and seeing just the clear waters and the reefs and all of the marine and aquatic life that Belize has to offer is an amazing thing to do. The next activity that I'm going to say to do is go to the Belize Zoo. I am usually not a big fan of zoos. I think that animals in captivity just generally makes me really sad, and I think that if you're holding an animal for show, we don't have to get too much into that, but I'm usually not a fan. But the Belize Zoo does a lot of conservation, and they do a lot of rehabilitation, and they really are doing it right, and it is home to a lot of native Belizean animals that you probably won't see when you're there, just because they're endangered or They don't like humans, but I was able to see just the most amazing animals when I was there. And it's not like what you would think about in a US zoo. It's very small, it's very quiet, it's very low-key and relaxed, but you can see like jaguars and monkeys and these beautiful birds that I never even knew existed. And just truly some amazing animals. And I think that as someone who, loves nature and loves exploring, we often don't really think about what type of animals are around us, and to know that, those animals that were at the zoo really do exist in Belize and really do exist in the jungle in Belize is pretty fascinating. Okay, we only have a few more left, but I'm going to say the next thing to do is you have to take a boat out. Now, there are lots of options here for you to do that. If you are traveling from the mainland to an island, which is really popular, you will obviously take a boat to get there, and even that experience is just amazing in itself. But if you can plan some sort of boat tour, if you can get on a line, if you can get your hotel to set it up for you, being able to take a boat out onto that open water is so beautiful. It's so worth it. And a lot of different companies in Belize will set up options for you. The last thing that I'm going to say is that I think that it's important to kind of take to the town. And this is the last activity I'm going to say. I say take to the town because I think although, visiting places and staying kind of in a bubble of luxury and in a resort, and I might have lots of options for you, is relaxing and fun and, maybe what you're looking for. But I think that you'd be surprised if you kind of remove yourself from that very, westernized place and actually take the time to, go to the downtown area, take the time to, take a taxi and go into town somewhere else. I think I often grow the most and I often get the most out of travel when I do push myself to do things like this. Try, a local food place. Purchase items from a local who is, making jewelry or making baskets or, making clothing, something like that. I find that those are A, the best gifts, and B, those really do end up being the best experiences that I have. And something that I plan to talk more about, and something that I'm still learning very much myself, is kind of being comfortable being uncomfortable. So pushing myself as far out as I can in order to get the experience that I think that I should have in a country, and being able to just continue to do things that you're not familiar with, I think is a way to really make your trip full. And so that's why I say as my last thing, take time to take to the town. Go walk around, go shop, go get local food, talk to local people. All of these things really will make your time there much more special. And Belize is a unique place with a unique culture and unique people. And I think it's important for not only people who are backpacking or doing research. I think it's important for everyone to understand that and to kind of be able to learn a little bit from Belizean people would be really special. So, talking about all of this, when we do come back to from the break, I am going to talk to you specifically about the research I did in Belize and what exactly I was doing there.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
this segment, I really want to talk about my experience specifically that I had in Belize. And although my research that I did doesn't necessarily have to do with travel, I think that a big part of travel is culture. And I think that if you are going to travel to a new place that you are not familiar with, I think that understanding that culture is really important. And I think it's really easy, and I've been, guilty of this as well, to kind of, especially in a lot of, island communities that have opportunities to, stay in a big resort, to never leave. I think that it's very easy to become blind to the people that live there, or blind to the issues that a country may have. And it's my goal when I travel to at least start to understand some of those issues, and at least start to understand a culture and a peoples that live in the places that I'm traveling. And that is something that has become really important to me. And maybe it's important to you, maybe it's not important to you, but it is what I'm very passionate about. And so I'm really excited to talk about what I learned in my research that I did. And it was mainly, as I mentioned, focused on women's health and spirituality. And so we looked at a lot of things, including teen pregnancy and women's rights and the AIDS epidemic that's happening in Belize. But what I focused in on specifically is women's health and accessibility. And that is really what I'm going to focus on today. And so what I looked at basically was, how are women getting access? Belize is a Catholic country, and there's very little sex education that happens, and so I wanted to know if women weren't able to get reproductive and sex education in schools, which they aren't. How are they getting it, and how are women able to afford things like mammograms and pregnancy screenings and ultrasounds and so on and so forth? And so what I found in my research is that Belize is an incredibly young country. The median age is 23, and to give you a reference, in the US, the median age is 38. And so what often happens is there's a high rate of teen pregnancy that goes on. So 19% of women ages 15 to 19 will become pregnant, and a rule in Belize is that if you are pregnant, you are unable to attend school. And that's just the duration of your pregnancy. However, as would make sense, a lot of women, once they become pregnant and leave school, don't return. And what happens is this creates a pretty deep dependency for young women to either stay with the person that got them pregnant, or have a dependency on their parents, and they're less likely to go back to school, less likely to pursue a career, and ultimately less likely to progress themselves. And so this really fascinated me, and I kind of, looked more into pregnancy, and because Belize has a lot of different, although it's a Catholic country, it has a lot of different religions and a lot of different traditional and religious practices. And what I learned was that unlike in the US, a lot of women won't go see a doctor for the majority of their pregnancy. I did learn that about 98% of women in Belize will receive care at least once during their pregnancy, at least once. And 45% of those are doctors, and 46% are nurses or midwives. And that is a high rate, and that is really good. And I also discovered that 95% of deliveries in the Cayo district, like I was talking about, and in the Belize City district are in a health facility. However, if we look at that in comparison to a different district, like the Toledo district, which is much more rural, only 52% of deliveries are done in a healthcare facility. So that means 50% of women in some parts of Belize are doing kind of an at-home birthing technique. And as we know, this kind of is obviously up to the woman, and women can do whatever they want with their bodies, but this comes with a lot more health regulations. And so that was an interesting thing that I learned about Belize, about how there are a lot of spiritual and religious practices that go against kind of that modern, or what we think of as modern, having women give birth inside a hospital and kind of have their entire, from conception to after birth, be watched over by a doctor. And so what I learned is that there is less of that going on in Belize, and there's a lot more spiritual and religious and holistic ways that they deal with pregnancy and pre-pregnancy and post-pregnancy. And so moving on, another piece of research that I looked at was cervical cancer in Belize and how it's related to HPV. And as I mentioned before, Belize has an issue with the spreading of STDs and has a high pregnancy rate and also has the highest HIV rate in Central America. And a big reason for this, as I mentioned, is a real lack of education that goes on in the public school system. And as we know, when kids are less educated, they are less educated specifically on sex. They are more likely to spread STIs and to get STIs and to have unsafe sex. And so cervical cancer is the single most deadly cancer for women in Belize. And HPV is a known carcinogen for cervical cancer. And we have the HPV vac optional in the United States. And in Belize, there are 2 vaccinations that are available, but they're not widely spread and they're definitely not mandatory. And so I actually looked into a scientific study of 4,000 girls that were followed throughout their lifetime. And the people who were running the study calculated all of the costs and all of the money saved from taking the HPV vaccination. And the HPV vac is estimated to prevent 69 new cases of cervical cancer and 51 cervical cancer-related deaths. And so that was kind of the outcome. So they were looking at, okay, if these girls have the HPV vac, will they get cervical cancer? Will they get HPV? And what money will they be saving by getting the HPV vac? And what they discovered was that it was a positive experiment. So they calculated what their wage loss would be and what medical costs would be if they did have HPV or they did have cervical cancer, and they ended up saving on average a US $1,320. So to put that in perspective, the GDP of Belize is approximately $4,795. And so they're saving 1/4 of their overall income for the year by getting the HPV vac, because in turn they would not be paying for cancer treatment, they would not be paying for STI treatment, they would not be paying, or they wouldn't be losing time at their jobs to do any of this. And so the lifetime healthcare costs saved by the women and their families represented more than 60% of the investment costs needed by the government to have the vaccine. And so what this study essentially is measuring is if Belize spends the money to get everyone the HPV vac, in turn, it is going to promote more money in Belize in general. It's going to save everyone money. When people have more money that they saved, we know that they're more likely to spend money, so that is going to overall raise the amount of money in the hands of people in Belize. And so that is a study that I discovered and something that I think is really important. However, as we know, things aren't always perfect, and the government in Belize has a lot of work to do, and there currently is no easily accessible HPV vaccination. And so that kind of moves on to my next topic that I looked into, which was STI treatment. And so as I mentioned, STIs are a big issue happening in Belize because of this lack of overall understanding of sex education, and it is very popular in the culture of Belize to not talk about sex and to not talk about safe practices, and in a lot of places, birth control is very controversial, it's very taboo, and so there is a lot of issues with STIs. And so I looked at how Belizeans were getting their STI treatments. And this is from the Belize Ministry of Health and Action Plan. But their essential outline for an STI treatment is to provide information, counseling, a diagnosis, a treatment, surveillance, contact tracing, and research. And that is part of the Belizean government, what they're trying to do to help STIs. But as we know, there is a really big issue with saying you're going to do something and then actually doing it. And so when we look further into some statistics, we understand that there's one primary health care nurse, and even if you're a gynecologist, per 5,000 people in Belize. So one primary health care nurse to 5,000 people. And if there are gynecologists, it is majority maternal and child care. And so that means that there's this massive gap in the healthcare system that is leaving out things like pap smears, STI diagnosis and treatment, HIV testing, family planning services, prevention and management of gender-based violence, all of these things that are really important. And something else that I discovered is that it is not rationalized based on the needs of each district. And as I've talked about districts before, there are 6 different districts in Belize, and they all are very different. For example, the Belize City District is a city, and it has its own needs, whereas the Cayo District is more in the mountains, and that has its own needs. And so it's not rationalized with through the district. So, for example, Dangriga is a town in Belize, and it's reported to have the second highest HIV transmission rates in Belize, but there's no resources there for non-pregnant women. Whereas in another place, there might be a lot of resources for HIV testing where it's not as big of an issue. And so when we kind of pull this apart, we begin to realize that the Belizean government has a long way to go in terms of planning and in terms of employing doctors and nurses and gynecologists to kind of help with this issue. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to explain some solutions and some organizations in Belize that are doing some amazing things, and even some places that if you want to go to Belize, that you should spend your time there and volunteer there. And that'll all happen right after the break.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
About the research that I did in Belize. We talked about women's health, we talked about STI and STD treatment, we talked about pregnancy, so on and so forth. And what I mentioned before was that there's a lot of work to be done in Belize. As we know, there's a lot of work to be done in most places in the world. And government participation is extremely important in that. However, there are some organizations and some facilities that truly are doing some amazing work. And one of my favorite parts of my time and my research in Belize was being able to visit these places, and some of the most remarkable women and men work there, and to be able to see all of the work that these men and women are doing, despite the fact that they don't have always have government approval or popular approval, to know that there are people all around the world, and what I experienced in Belize, who are kind of fighting that good fight, was very inspiring to me and important to me, and it left me with a lot to think about in terms of how I want to live my life and who I should be helping in life. And it's these experiences and these travel experiences that make me keep traveling. I feel like I have, in the last few years, just opened my eyes to some different people and different experiences and good things and bad things and difficult things. And by no means was my time in Belize a wonderful, beautiful island vacation. it's a country that has its hardships and it has its struggles and it has its issues. And I think that as important as it was for me to, those times where I got to relax on the beach, it's equally, probably much more important for me to be able to hear these people speak and to be able to visit different facilities who are helping out the population of Belize and specifically helping out women, and also just talking to all of the women in Belize was a truly incredible experience. I got the very unique opportunity to talk to a few women in Belize who were HIV positive, and I got to hear their stories, and I got to hear their adversities they faced and the stigma that comes with being HIV positive and so on and so forth. And it's just truly a constant reminder of how much the world has to give and how much you can really learn from traveling. And I think that's my takeaway from this, and I hope that maybe your takeaway from this is that traveling can be so much more than a vacation. And I think that if you just look at and try to scratch past the surface just a little bit, you'd be really surprised about the things that you will learn and the people that you will meet. So having said all of that, I'm going to talk about some of those facilities and some of those people who are really helping Belize in this epidemic of HIV and AIDS and STIs and a general lack of health facilities in Belize. And so the first one I want to talk about is the Belize Family Life Association. The Belize Family Life Association does cervical screenings, integrated breast examination services. They do laboratory diagnosis of treatment of sexually transmitted infections, voluntary HIV testing services, abortion and post-abortion services, pregnant and non-pregnant women with access to gynecologists, and also children are benefiting from this, and they provide pediatricians. And so the Belize Family Life Association is essentially that support that is needed for women and for children and for people who really do need it. And so they have been putting in that work that a lot of the Belizean government has not been putting in, and I got a chance to go to the Belize Life Family Association and talk to some people there. They are truly inspiring. They also are truly overworked and underpaid, and it's a very unpopular profession to work in, to work as a women's health specialist in Belize, and it's very rare to find someone who actually wants to do the job, which is interesting. Another wonderful place that I was able to visit to, and this came with just so many amazing people that I talked to, was a organization called Cornerstone, and that was in San Ignacio, and I believe that they have a few other places up. And I bring up Cornerstone because Cornerstone actually has a program. If you want to find more out about it, you should go to their website. Again, it's just called Cornerstone. They provide a lot of support to women. They provide support to women who are victims of sexual violence and domestic violence, and essentially their goal is to lift up women and children the best way that they can. They provide lunch to students who can't afford to eat lunch at school. They give women technical training to be able to be entrepreneurships themselves. They give kids who are at a disadvantage, they teach them second languages, and they teach them technical skills, and they just are doing a really fabulous, amazing job of lifting up Belize in the best way that they can. And again, that's in San Ignacio. I have big plans to go back there and help out with Cornerstone. And so if you're interested in either Belize Family Life Association or Cornerstone, look them up, donate if you can, do what you can to help out these two amazing organizations. So we are going to switch gears a little bit after the break, and I am going to tell you how to properly dress conservative in a country. And Belize is a conservative country, and so I kind of had to pack in a way that I wouldn't usually pack. And so when we come back from the break, like I said, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks onto how to properly pack conservatively for a country you're traveling to.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
About how to dress when you're visiting a conservative country. Now, this is something I've been trying to perfect for a long time. I don't know if I'll ever get it perfect, but I've increasingly traveled to conservative countries in the past few years, and so I'm going to share with you what I've experienced so far. And I am going to tell you what not to wear. I'm going to tell you what I would choose to pack. And just as a precursor to this segment, I want to say that bottom line, you should never be told what to do with your own body. And I certainly am not telling you what to do or what you have to do. If you don't feel comfortable dressing like this, then it is completely and totally up to you. I know for myself that I'm often frustrated by having to dress a certain way, especially as a woman. However, something that I have come to understand and wrap my head around is the idea of cultural sensitivity and what it means to be a visitor inside of a country. Even if you don't, believe in the values of a country you're visiting, you are visiting, and you kind of have a responsibility to meet a country where it is. As a Western traveler, I think it's really easy to believe that the way that I dress and I act and I am is the right way, but sometimes that can be really detrimental, and I can be spreading my own culture when I do that, and that is not always right, and me spreading it as if it is right is detrimental in itself. For me, I always try to leave the smallest cultural footprint possible when traveling, and unfortunately, dressing is kind of a part of this. And so, if you want to hear more about cultural footprints and ethnocentrism, you should let me know on Twitter or on Facebook, and I'd love to do a segment on it. But with that in mind, let's get back to the conservative clothes. I originally was going to separate the segment into how men should dress and how women should dress because although in the US I think clothing is becoming increasingly more gender neutral, unfortunately that's just not the case worldwide. In a lot of countries, the way that men should dress and the way that women should dress is expected to be different. And so there are a few certain cultural expectations for men identifying and for women identifying individuals that are different. But for the most part, I am going to try to keep this as gender neutral as possible because it is important for, anyone to understand how to dress when they want to travel. So, first up, the clothes that I would avoid wearing. If you want to play it safe, if you are just going to take away a few things from this segment, I'm going to tell you, don't bring anything that is tight, ripped, short, or see-through. These are 4 very simple guidelines. Just don't bring anything tight, ripped, short, or see-through. Avoiding these clothes is going to help you a lot. Moving on to some more specifics, I'm going to talk about tops. I love t-shirts. I really do. I wear them all the time. But something you might not think about is if you're wearing a graphic t-shirt, avoid anything that could be viewed as violent, sexual, crude, or culturally insensitive. Sometimes I don't think about the implications that some of my band t-shirts or thrifted t-shirts could have, but I think that you need to be careful of that. Like I said, as a Westerner, just something to be cautious of. And so think about a t-shirt. This is the terms I always like to put it in when I'm dressing culturally sensitive. Think about a t-shirt you would feel comfortable having to explain to anyone who asks you, as a rule. So moving on, cut-off tank tops, the ones that dip really low, tend to have this kind of messy and disheveled look and should probably be avoided. That's especially for men. Thin or strapless tank tops like camis or tube tops are definitely a no. In general, I would avoid anything that specifically shows off or accentuates your chest or midsection. I try to either wear shirts that come to my collarbone, or if they don't, I try to layer something different that's high-necked underneath. Also, probably half my wardrobe is made out of crop tops, but not showing midsection really is key, and so plan to either bring high-waisted bottoms or accompany your tops, or you should probably just leave them behind. So, moving on to pants. Pants can be a bit more of a struggle for me, especially if you are in tropical climates. So, obviously, I would avoid wearing short shorts, obviously. I would also avoid wearing sweatpants or ripped jeans, and I would especially avoid wearing leggings. Unless you're going to wear them under a long shirt or a dress. And the leggings things tend to be really difficult. A lot of women that I've traveled with have a hard time wearing comfortable things like on airplanes and so on and so forth that aren't leggings or sweatpants. And so that could be a bit of a struggle. But now I'm going to tell you what you should pack and what I like to pack in order to stay conservative and comfortable. My suggestions to stay safe are long, flowy skirts and pants. I bought a reversible wrap skirt that goes past my knees in Nepal last year, and I've been wearing that a lot to conservative countries. I also have some flowy loose pants, but this is more of a personal opinion, one that I think could go a far way. I won't tell again. I don't want to tell anyone exactly how to dress, but to avoid screaming tourist, I would try to find some solid colored loose flowy pants or ones that have a muted tone as opposed to those like quote elephant pants or quote tribal print pants, which I know there's a lot of them. It's tempting, but to avoid A, cultural appropriation, and B, to not out yourself even more as a tourist than you already are, just try to go simple. It'll be easier to pair with things anyway. Also, I love dresses. I think dresses are great things to wear when you're traveling. T-shirt dresses pack well, but nothing really beats a loose, flowy maxi dress. I thrifted one a few years ago, and it's kind of this colorless gray, and it has almost no shape to it, but that means that I can wear it with anything. I can wear it with t-shirts or long sleeve shirts underneath, sweaters, leggings. I can belt it easily, and it kind of has this day to night wear really seamlessly, and that is something that I always look for when I'm traveling. Something else I would suggest is some plain t-shirts. I usually just bring like 2 white t-shirts and 2 black t-shirts. They're simple, they're safe, they go with everything, they're conservative. Also, layers is something that I absolutely suggest. I like button-ups and cardigans, and my personal favorite is just one of those big blanket shawls. A lot of the times, depending on where you're going, you can get them inside the country, which is great. While I was in Sumatra last year, I actually got a handmade one that I can wear as a cover-up, to the beach, to church, as a skirt, as a dress, as a blanket. It literally goes and can be anything. And the only downside to this is if you get one of those blanket shawls, it can be bulky and it can get wrinkled easily. And so that is something that I'm still trying to work on for my ideal material, and I will certainly update you as soon as I find it. My other go-tos for this, and this is great especially for men, is to purchase, invest in a sleek black hiking pant. I wear these everywhere. Here's the hack. And this is for traveling, not hiking. Please wear whatever you want when you're hiking. Get a pair of pants in that hiking pant material, kind of waterproof, sleek, but get them with no bulky pockets. And if you prefer it, as I do, get them high-waisted. And definitely buy them in a black or a gray color. If you do this, you can wear these with athletic tops, with t-shirts, but you could also belt them and wear them with a blouse, and you literally never have to wash them. So that rewear rate that I talk about all the time is very, very high. So that essentially concludes my guide to dressing conservatively in different countries. To close out the topic, my best advice to you is do your research. I have been to some countries where I was required to wear a Sulu every single day, and it was considered indecent without it. But I've also been to some places where conservatism is more of a preferred expectation as opposed to a mandatory expectation. Consider if you're going to be in a city as opposed to the countryside. Are you staying at a resort that's very isolated, or in a hostel, or are you staying at a homestay? These are all things to think about when you are traveling to somewhere that is conservative, so just do your research. Okay, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I have some more things to say about Belize.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Travel is exciting. It is something worth documenting. It's something I love documenting, and something that I wanted to talk about in the last few minutes of our show is ways that you can document and remember the country you're staying in. And this is something that I thought about a lot in Belize. As a podcaster and as someone who just has a general love for audio content, I used to record a lot of different things, a lot of sounds, a lot of animals, a lot of people. But when I was in Belize, I felt like I didn't want to record people who I was talking to. And so I kind of had to think about a different way to remember my trip in general. And so what I just want to talk about is some great ways that you can process and document and show people in your life the trip that you've had. And obviously, we think about, taking pictures. And when we have our phones, it's so easy to be able to capture moments like this. And for me, when I'm traveling, I don't love to have my phone out all the time. And so I kind of find, even if you have just a small handheld camera, that is actually a much more effective way to travel, because I'm not constantly in contact with my phone. A lot of times if I'm seeing these beautiful sights, if I'm at the ocean, if I'm in the mountains, the last thing I want to be doing is be on my phone, forcefully connected to the entire world. And so something I would suggest is, and again, it does not have to be nice, like a point and shoot camera can sometimes go a really far away, because I think that pictures are such an amazing way to capture a trip. And something that I do on every trip, which again is mostly personal preference, I love disposable cameras. And so something I'll do almost every trip is take a disposable camera with me, because this is very cheap, it's inexpensive, and I'm not too worried about it. And so I feel like I can bring it with me when I'm backpacking. I can bring it with me on a boat, and I'm not worried about it getting wet, because it doesn't cost very much money, and not much is lost if something happens to it. But another really important way to document a trip is by journaling. And this is something that I'm trying to incorporate more into my everyday life, but something I've been able to incorporate into most of my travel life. And that is just every day, at the very least, keeping a documentation of what you've done and where you went and who you spoke to is really important, and it's been something I've been proud of myself for doing because, 3-4 years, I am able to look back to that time and recall almost in a better way than I would be if I were to see pictures. And so getting a good journal and just kind of forcing yourself at the end of your day to write an account of what you did, it's a great way to reflect. Topics that I want to talk about much more often in the future of this podcast is culture shock and reverse culture shock. And sometimes the best way to understand and to cope with those things is to write it out. And if anything else, it is just a way to document your trip. So I would suggest a camera, I would suggest a journal, and then of course something that is so fun and that I love to watch every time, and I'm not someone who usually does this, but oftentimes people who I'm traveling will make something like this, and that is video footage or video. I think that these are so cool and I want to get into them more often. But if you have a GoPro, your phone, like I said, any type of camera, actually recording video footage of what you're seeing and the people you are with and the environment gives this kind of extra glimpse as to what the trip really was like. And I think that it can be very special, and it's something I'd like to get better at remembering to do. And so if you can bring a camera, if you can bring a journal, and if you have some way to record video, that is going to allow you to remember these trips far after you've come home from them. And I think that that is something really important and special, and I think it's something that you'll thank yourself for much later in the future. And that is going to do it today for the podcast. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you, if you could, to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. And if you could please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.